Good morning, once again from ICT. In today's video we're going to go over on how to change the main base housing on your TAO-A, TAO-V, or LX7 bill acceptors. In my prior videos I was using a TAO as an example. Today we're going to be using an LX7. As I mentioned before, the mechanics between the two units are the same. There are differences in the boards and whatnot, but if and when possible you would like to stay with the parts specifically for those models. So while they are interchangeable, if you can stick with the specific unit parts for those units. So give me a moment here. Let me switch over to my lower camera. So today, as I mentioned, we'll be changing the main base on an LX7. Some things that have been happening with the LX7s specifically for some reason, we're looking into it, but the housing might come in half. You could see that crack there. That should not be there. You follow it back, it goes for the whole unit, essentially making two parts of one unit. So obviously that is not good and will lead to multiple issues with the build path or just normal operation. So let's go ahead and get that squared away. So I like to do some little bit of prep work on the new housing, as there will be some parts that you'll need to switch over to this one from your old unit. And most people overlook this because it's very simple to forget. But you want to remember off of your previous old unit housing to remove the water plugs as well as your catch box release. So those plugs you could just pull out and set off to the side. Or actually, go ahead and put them in your new case. That way you don't lose them. Oh, you can see, just put those in there. As for your slide button, if you look at it from the board side, there'll be a little opening right here, and you'll look down and you'll see a white tab. That's basically the release that will allow you to slide off and down off your slide button and spring. So let's go ahead and put that on your new one. And it just snaps in like that. Alright, for US-based LX7 units, they do have USB. So on these new housings, there is this little window that will just have to be broken out. Let me just bend it off and remove it. You won't need that. In some other areas, the units don't have a USB port, so they put that breakaway since these housings aren't country specific. So they have multiple options to facilitate all those customers. So with those parts switched over, we can change our focus back to the old unit. So obviously remove the CPU cover as well as the front bezel. Alright, and then go ahead and take out the CPU board. Now when you have a broken case, these screw holes may be broken, so it might just free spin. If that's the case, kind of grab behind and squeeze the board towards the unit to kind of pin the screw, and that should allow it to grab enough to remove that screw for you. And remember, since this is broken in half, once you do get these middle screws, things will start flopping around. So as you're removing this last screw at the bottom, just kind of hold everything in place. Go ahead and slide out your sensor housing and reach in and unplug your motor housing, flat cable, stacker motor, and pull out your LED harness and set that whole assembly off to the side. So pieces flew out, little plastic parts. As you can see here, yes, just fall out. Yeah. So as you can see, that's bad. That is definitely going to cause problems. So let's get this case switched over and back in operation. So when your case is in half like this, it does make things a little bit more challenging. I like to remove the stacker motor first, and that way you can have two separate parts of a unit. That makes it a little bit easier to work with. So inside there you'll see this screw. Remove this screw as well as your motor wiring that's routed through the retention hooks to keep it clear of the raster, as well as the 3 screws on the back that hold in that motor. Sometimes it's a bit stubborn, but you'll get it eventually. Alright, with those screws out, you can then lift out, well, that's what actually separates both parts of these units. So, let's set the lower part off to the side for a minute here and continue working with this upper half. So just undo the stacker motor and set that off to the side. And as I mentioned previously, go ahead and remove that one screw that holds in that metal stacker arm housing. Once that screw is out, if you pull that whole assembly out to the right, that will allow it to come free. Okay, let's go ahead and dive right in and put this assembly back in your new main base housing. Remember, as you get this in the stacker, sure that the arm is outside the housing and in the down, or well, it can be in any position, but you want to be sure that that can free move and not be bound up from the housing. Alright, and with that back in, go ahead and put your screw back in. As such. I generally just try to wipe up the motors before I put them back in. They're just dusty, dirty. You don't have to do this, but it was already out, why not? Let's actually get all the parts out of the old housing just so we can start fresh into the new one. So let's go ahead and set the motor off to the side and go back to the lower housing. It's not much for this lower housing. The two screws on the back that hold in the oh, come on, why are you going to focus? The two screws that hold in the LED housing. Just remove these two. With those two screws removed, you could basically push that whole housing out. And set that off to the side as well. Before you do, I generally check this bill path to be sure that there's no gouges or anything that might obstruct the bill as it's being inserted. Since you have it out, that's a good time to check, as when it is installed in a unit, it's kind of more difficult to see the upper housing when it's installed in the unit. Let's set that off to the side for now as well. And we still have to remove the drive motor and the gearbox. So the drive motor, as you remember from my previous video, you remove the 3 or 4 screws from the side panel, which will expose your gears. With those screws out, you could just pull your gear cover straight up. Since we're having to change everything, go ahead and dump out all your gears anyway. With all your gears out, you have those two 00 Phillips screws that hold in your actual drive motor. So go ahead and remove those. And lower wire hooks for the drive motor. And get your drive motor off to the side as well. Before we're done with this lower piece, there is this little metal piece that goes between, where's my pointer? There's my pointer. This piece goes between the motor and your screws. This is so the motors have something to screw into, and not just the plastic, and possibly strip that out. So that can just be popped out. And we'll be putting this back onto your new main housing. So with that last piece off, we're done with this. This is just scrap plastic now. Set that off to the side. So let's go ahead and put that piece for the motors that we just took off back into place. It does only fit one way since it's formed around that screw hole right here. So, alright, let's go ahead and get the drive motor back in. Those two Phillips screws. So far, you should have your drive motor with the cables routed in the internal hooks, and your drive motor installed with the two 00 Phillips screws and that motor plate between your main housing and the motor. Let's see, let me see if I can put this down a little bit. So from this point, just start putting in your gear posts The first one that would go down would be, I don't know if I can focus this good enough. Would be that one. And that basically just goes down as such. The next one to go down would be basically the duplicate of that one. And that goes straight down on top of that other one. And then the last gear that would go on these main gears is the reinforced one. As such. And there's already a problem. So I'm glad I found this while I'm making this video. So as you can see, this post is really long, and this post is not really coming out as it should. So that means we just reverse the posts. So go ahead and remove everything we just did and switch over your post to the different holes. So when they're lined up, they should be fairly even. All three of those posts should level out at the same level. So that way, when all your gears are in, you still have a lot of axle play that's left as a buffer. So the last gear you would put in at this last one is the remaining one. It just goes straight down as such. You could test your gearing by just turning the raster. It'll be very, very slow, but as long as it does move freely, then that is correct. So from here, go ahead and put your gear cover back on. As such, and those screws that you took out earlier. The screw holes for all of our new housings do not come pre-threaded for any of the holes, so take that into account to not over torque and blow out the screw holes on accident. So just take that into consideration. Alright, let's go ahead and get your LED housing. And there's a way you want to put this back together. Well, obviously. And let me demonstrate that for you here really quick. So when you get your white cable routed, you want to be sure to have it underneath the drive motor wires. so it kind of holds it back away from the raster as to not bind up during operation. Alright, when that's back in flush, go ahead and put those 2 screws back here on the back. Right, and let's go ahead and do your stacker motor next. Alright, get the wires underneath the clips. Alright. So when you got your motor back in there, be sure the wiring is all underneath those clips to keep the wires out of the raster. Go ahead and put those 3 stacker motor screws back in. From here, go ahead and get your sensor board and CPU board. Get them back together. Plug in your drive motor, flat cable, your flat cable, okay. And tuck your LED harness back, and last but not least, your stacker motor. And go ahead and start putting in your 4 CPU board screws. Bezel. CPU cover, and checkbox. And that's basically it. We do have the side sticker here for the dip switches for the LX7. I'll put the part number in the description below. It's optional, but it does add a bit of convenience for your customers or yourself if you're an owner-operator. We have those available. For the TAOs, we don't normally stock those, but if there's enough demand, we might start, but as of right now, we do not. So if there's any other further questions about TAOs, LX7s, or any other units, feel free to contact us and let us know what we can help you out with. Have a great day.